The championship series had ended and the world was buzzing. Clark's team had claimed the title, and her game-winning shot in overtime would be replayed for years to come. It wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. But as the confetti settled and the camera zoomed in on the emotional exchange between her and Reese, something deeper emerged. A mutual understanding that this wasn't just about basketball anymore. Their journey had become symbolic of resilience, growth, and the power of pushing each other to new heights. In the weeks following the playoffs, both players found themselves navigating uncharted territory. For Reese, the loss stung more than she cared to admit. She replayed every moment of that final game in her mind. The missed opportunities, the defensive lapses, the split-second decisions that could have gone differently. At first, she buried herself in training, determined to prove that she still had what it took to dominate. But no matter how many hours she spent in the gym, doubts lingered. Was she fighting to reclaim her legacy? Or clinging to something that had already slipped away? One evening, after another grueling practice session, Reese sat alone in the locker room staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was tired, her eyes heavy with questions she didn't want to answer. Had she peaked too soon? Was she destined to be remembered as the player who couldn't adapt to a changing game? These thoughts haunted her, but they also fueled her determination to evolve. She realized that if she wanted to stay relevant, she needed to embrace change, not just on the court but within herself. Clark, on the other hand, faced a different kind of challenge. Winning the championship brought accolades, endorsements, and endless media appearances. On paper, life seemed perfect, but beneath the surface, cracks began to show. The pressure of being labeled the best weighed heavily on her shoulders. Every misstep, every off night, felt like a betrayal of the expectations people had placed on her. Friends noticed she wasn't as carefree as before. Her laughter came less frequently, her focus sharper but tinged with anxiety. During a late-night conversation with her coach, Clark admitted what she'd been feeling. "I thought winning would make everything easier," she confessed. "But it feels like I'm carrying this weight I can't put down, like I have to be perfect all the time." Her coach listened quietly before responding. "Perfection isn't the goal," he said gently. "What you and Reese did this season, it wasn't about being flawless. It was about showing up, giving your best, and growing along the way. That's what greatness looks like." Those words stuck with Clark. Slowly, she began to shift her mindset. Instead of chasing perfection, she focused on authenticity, on playing for the love of the game rather than the approval of others. It wasn't an easy transition, but it gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. As the off-season rolled around, Reese and Clark crossed paths again, not on the court, but at a charity event hosted by the league. Both were invited to speak about their experiences and inspire young athletes. Standing side by side on stage, they couldn't help but smile at the irony. Just months earlier, they'd been trading barbs and battling for supremacy. Now here they were, sharing a microphone and talking about teamwork, perseverance, and the importance of finding balance. Reese spoke first, her voice steady but reflective. "This season taught me a lot about myself," she said. "I used to think being the best meant never backing down, never showing weakness, but I learned that true strength comes from adapting, from embracing challenges even when they scare you. And honestly, I wouldn't have gotten here without someone pushing me every step of the way." When it was Clark's turn, she nodded in agreement. "I've always believed in working hard and staying humble," she said. "But this rivalry showed me that growth doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when you're pushed outside your comfort zone, when you're forced to see things from a new perspective. Playing against Reese made me better, not just as a player, but as a person." Their words resonated deeply with the audience, especially the kids sitting wide-eyed in the front row. For them, Reese and Clark weren't just rivals or stars. They were role models who proved that success wasn't about tearing each other down. It was about lifting each other up, even when it hurt. The rest of the off-season passed quickly, filled with community outreach programs, training camps, and quiet moments of reflection. Reese continued refining her game, adding new dimensions to her skill set while rediscovering joy in the process. Clark worked on strengthening her mental health, learning to prioritize self-care alongside competition. They remained connected, occasionally texting or meeting up to discuss strategies or share advice. Their bond had transformed from rivalry to partnership, a friendship forged in fire. When the new season began, fans eagerly anticipated their next showdown. Would their dynamic remain the same, or had their relationship evolved beyond basketball? The answer came during their first matchup of the year. From the opening tip-off, it was clear that this game carried a different tone. Reese and Clark played fiercely, yes, but there was an underlying respect that hadn't existed before. When Reese blocked one of Clark's shots, she patted her on the back as they jogged down the court. When Clark hit a clutch three-pointer over Reese's defense, she winked before sprinting back on defense. By halftime, commentators were gushing about how their chemistry elevated the entire game. "It's not just about winning anymore," one analyst observed. "They're redefining what it means to compete at the highest level." In the final minutes of the game, with the score tied and seconds ticking away, Clark found herself guarded tightly by Reese once again. This time, instead of forcing a shot, she drove into the lane and dished the ball to an open teammate for the winning layup. As the buzzer sounded, Clark turned to Reese and grinned. "Guess we're getting pretty good at this teamwork thing," she joked. Reese laughed, shaking her head. "Don't get used to it." That season marked a turning point, not just for Reese and Clark, but for the sport itself. Their rivalry had captivated audiences worldwide, but their ability to transcend it inspired a generation. Young players looked up to them not just for their skills, but for their willingness to grow, adapt, and support each other. Coaches praised their professionalism, while fans celebrated their humanity. By the end of the year, both players achieved milestones that solidified their legacies. Reese earned recognition as one of the most improved players in the league, showcasing a versatility few thought possible. Clark claimed the MVP award, cementing her status as the face of modern basketball. Yet neither accomplishment overshadowed what truly mattered, the impact they'd had on each other and the game. In interviews, they often reflected on their journey. "People ask me if I regret anything about our rivalry," Reese said during one sit-down. "And honestly, I don't. Every argument, every heated moment, it led us here, to where we are now, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." Clark echoed those sentiments. "At the start, I thought winning was the only thing that mattered. But now I realize that growth is the real victory. Without Reese pushing me, I wouldn't be the player, or the person I am today." Their story didn't end with trophies or records. It lived on in the countless lives they touched, in the young athletes who dreamed of emulating their grit and grace. Reese and Clark may have started as rivals, but they finished as pioneers, two women who reminded the world that greatness isn't about standing above others. It's about rising together hand in hand toward something bigger than yourself. And so as the curtain fell on another unforgettable season, one truth remained undeniable. Basketball would never be the same. Because of them, it was better, stronger, more human. The global tournament had been a turning point, but life doesn't pause for anyone, not even for two players who had just proven themselves on the world stage. Back home, reality hit hard and fast. The same fans who celebrated their international success were now eagerly awaiting their next head-to-head clash in the domestic league. The tension hadn't disappeared, it had merely shifted. Reese and Clark returned to their teams knowing that their rivalry wasn't over. It was evolving. Their first matchup after the tournament felt like stepping back into familiar territory, yet everything seemed different. Both players carried themselves with a newfound confidence, but there was also an undercurrent of something else: respect. It wasn't obvious at first. To the casual observer, it looked like business as usual. Reese bulldozing her way through defenders, Clark weaving around opponents with effortless grace. But those paying attention noticed subtle changes. When Clark sank a three-pointer over Reese's outstretched hand, she didn't celebrate with her usual flair. Instead, she gave a quick nod before jogging back on defense. and when Reese threw down a thunderous dunk, she glanced at Clark, not with anger or arrogance, but almost as if seeking acknowledgement. The game itself was intense, as always. Every possession mattered, every play counted. Fans leaned forward, in their seats, torn between cheering for the raw power of Reese or the finesse of Clark. By halftime, the score was tied, and the energy in the arena crackled like electricity. Analysts scrambled to make sense of what they were seeing. Was this still the same bitter rivalry, or had something deeper taken root? During one timeout late in the third quarter, cameras caught a rare moment. Reese huddled with her coach, pointing out defensive adjustments while Clark stood nearby, listening intently. For a brief second, their eyes met, and Clark offered a suggestion about how to counter Reese's strategy. There was no animosity, no trash talk, just pure basketball IQ being shared in real time. Commentators buzzed about the exchange during the broadcast, speculating whether their partnership overseas had truly changed things. By the fourth quarter, the game reached its climax. With less than 2 minutes left, Clark hit a deep three-pointer to give her team a narrow lead. Reese responded immediately, muscling her way through traffic for a tough layup. The crowd roared, sensing that the outcome would come down to the final seconds. As the clock ticked below 30 seconds, Clark found herself guarded tightly by Reese once again. This time, though, there was none of the hostility from their earlier encounters. Their focus was razor-sharp, their movements calculated. Clark faked left, then right, creating just enough space to launch another shot. Swish. Reese jogged back up the court, shaking her head but smiling faintly. "Nice shot," she muttered loud enough for Clark to hear. Clark smirked in response. "You're not making it easy," she shot back, her tone playful rather than cutting. When the buzzer sounded, Clark's team emerged victorious. But instead of the usual post-game theatrics, trash talk, dismissive comments, they approached each other differently. Reese extended her hand, and Clark accepted it without hesitation. Then, unexpectedly, Reese pulled her in for a quick hug. Cameras flashed wildly as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Neither player said much afterward, but their body language spoke volumes. Something fundamental had shifted. Away from the bright lights of the arena, both women continued to grapple with the weight of their journeys. Reese spent hours reflecting on how far she'd come since the start of the season. She had entered the year determined to prove she was still the best, only to find herself humbled, not just by Clark, but by the process itself. Her relationship with Clark had forced her to confront weaknesses she never wanted to admit existed. Adapting her game hadn't been easy, especially for someone so fiercely proud. Yet here she was, stronger and more versatile because of it. Late at night, Reese often thought about their conversations during the tournament, the ones where they opened up about their struggles. She realized now that she wasn't alone in feeling overwhelmed. Seeing Clark's vulnerability had reminded her of her own humanity. Basketball might have made them rivals, but life had turned them into mirrors, reflecting parts of themselves they couldn't ignore. For Clark, the experience had been equally transformative. Representing her country alongside Reese had given her perspective. Before, she'd viewed their rivalry as a competition to be won at all costs. Now, she saw it as something more, a chance to grow, to push boundaries, to redefine what success meant. Winning games was important, yes, but winning respect from others and from herself felt even more meaningful. Still, the road ahead wasn't smooth. Public perception remained divided. Some fans clung to the old narrative, insisting that Reese's physical dominance made her superior. Others argued that Clark's adaptability and creativity set her apart. Social media debates raged on with hashtags trending daily. Both players tried to tune out the noise, focusing instead on what truly mattered, improving their craft and leading their teams. Their coaches noticed the shift too. Reese's ability to read the game improved dramatically, thanks in part to insights gained from studying Clark's style. Meanwhile, Clark worked tirelessly to strengthen her defense, drawing inspiration from Reese's tenacity. They weren't just competing against each other anymore. They were learning from each other. elevating their games in ways neither could have imagined. As the season progressed, their matchups became must-watch events, not just for the intensity on the court, but for the evolution of their dynamic off it. In interviews, they began speaking more openly about their journey, acknowledging the role they played in each other's growth. Reese credited Clark for pushing her to expand her skill set, while Clark praised Reese for teaching her resilience. Their words weren't rehearsed or forced. They came from a place of genuine admiration. But challenges still loomed. The playoffs brought renewed pressure, and both players knew that their next showdown could define their legacies. Reese understood that this might be her last chance to cement her status as one of the all-time greats. Clark, meanwhile, carried the hopes of a new generation, eager to prove that she belonged among the elite. When the championship series rolled around, emotions ran high. Each game felt like a battle for survival, with neither side willing to yield. Reese and Clark delivered performances that will go down in history, moments of brilliance that left fans breathless. In Game 5, with the series tied 2-2, Clark hit a game-winning shot in overtime, sealing the victory for her team. As confetti rained down, she searched for Reese amidst the chaos. Reese sat alone on the bench, staring at the floor, her expression unreadable. Clark hesitated for a moment before walking over and extending her hand. "You were incredible," she said, sincerely. Reese looked up, tears glistening in her eyes, and nodded. "Yeah, you too." In that moment, it became clear. Their rivalry wasn't about proving who was better. It was about becoming the best versions of themselves. Together, they had redefined what greatness looked like, not just as individuals, but as pioneers of a new era in basketball. Little did they know, their story was far from over. While they had conquered the court, challenges outside the game awaited. Fame, expectations, and personal demons would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But one thing was certain: whatever came next, they would face it with courage and perhaps with a little help from each other. The dust had barely settled from their explosive playoff series when life threw both players a curveball, one that neither of them saw coming. It wasn't just another game or another rivalry-fueled showdown. This time, it was bigger than basketball. The announcement came out of nowhere. They'd been selected to represent their country in a prestigious global exhibition tournament. And not as opponents this time. Oh no, they were going to have to play together. At first, the idea seemed laughable. How could two people who had spent months tearing each other apart on and off the court suddenly put aside their differences and work as teammates? Fans were skeptical, analysts were divided, and even the players themselves weren't convinced it would work. Reese openly questioned the decision during an interview. "I don't know if we're ready for that," she said bluntly. "It's one thing to compete against someone, but working with them, that's a whole different story." Clark, ever the diplomat, tried to sound optimistic. "We'll figure it out," she told reporters. "At the end of the day, it's about representing something bigger than ourselves." But behind closed doors, her doubts mirrored Reese's. Trust didn't come easily after everything they'd been through. Could they really set aside their egos and focus on the team? Training camp started awkwardly, to say the least. When they arrived at the facility, there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Reese kept her distance, sticking to her usual routine of intense workouts and minimal conversation. Clark did the same, quietly observing while avoiding direct eye contact. Their body language screamed discomfort, and the rest of the team could feel it too. Coaches exchanged worried glances, unsure how to bridge the gap between these two titans. But then came practice. For the first time, they were forced to share the court, not as rivals, but as partners. The drills were simple enough at first: passing sequences, defensive rotations, basic pick-and-roll plays. Yet every interaction felt loaded. Would Reese pass to Clark when she was open? Would Clark trust Reese to make the right play under pressure? At first, the answers seemed to be no. Passes were missed, shots were forced, and frustration bubbled over more than once. One particular drill stands out because it became a turning point. It was a fast break exercise designed to test teamwork and chemistry. Reese got the rebound, and sprinted down the court, expecting everyone else to follow her lead. Clark, however, darted ahead, calling for the ball. Reese hesitated for a split second before reluctantly tossing it her way. Clark caught it mid-stride, spun around a defender, and dished it back to Reese for an easy layup. The entire gym paused for a moment. No one said anything, but you could see the gears turning in their heads, including theirs. Afterward, during a water break, Clark walked over to Reese. "Good finish," she said casually, offering a small smile. Reese looked up, surprised by the gesture, and after a beat, nodded. "Nice pass," she replied gruffly. It wasn't much, but it was something, a crack in the wall they'd built between them. Over the next few days, those cracks began to widen. Slowly but surely, they started finding common ground. During film sessions, they sat next to each other, pointing out plays and strategies without realizing they were actually collaborating. In practice, their movements became more fluid, almost instinctive. Reese learned to trust Clark's vision, while Clark adjusted to Reese's physicality. They weren't best friends overnight, but they were starting to understand each other in a way they never had before. Off the court, things shifted, too. Late one evening, after a long day of training, they found themselves alone in the locker room. Reese was icing her knees, staring blankly at the floor when Clark walked in. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You good?" she asked softly. Reese glanced up, surprised by the question. "Yeah," she muttered. "Just tired." They sat there in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels heavy until someone finally breaks it. Clark spoke first. "You know," she said slowly, "this isn't easy for me either. All the criticism, the pressure. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for this." Reese raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "You? Seriously? You're the golden girl everyone loves." Clark laughed bitterly. "That's what they think. But it's not real, you know? None of it is. I'm just trying to survive like everybody else." For the first time, Reese saw a side of Clark she hadn't expected. Vulnerability. Up until now, she'd always assumed Clark thrived under pressure, that she floated effortlessly through life like some untouchable superstar. But sitting here, listening to her talk, Reese realized they weren't so different after all. They were both fighting battles no one else could see. "I get it," Reese admitted after a pause. "People think I'm invincible too, like I don't feel pain or doubt or fear, but I do, every damn day." The conversation didn't solve everything. It couldn't erase years of rivalry and resentment, but it planted a seed. From that moment on, their dynamic began to shift. On the court, they communicated more openly, trusting each other to make the right decisions. Off the court, they started sharing meals, swapping stories about their childhoods and what drove them to pursue basketball. Reese talked about growing up in a neighborhood where sports were often the only way out. Clark opened up about feeling like an outsider in high school, always trying to prove herself to people who doubted her abilities. As the tournament approached, their bond grew stronger, not because they suddenly became inseparable, but because they finally understood each other's strengths and weaknesses. Reese admired Clark's ability to stay calm under pressure, while Clark respected Reese's relentless determination. Together, they formed a partnership that was greater than the sum of its parts. When the big day arrived, the stakes couldn't have been higher. They were facing off against some of the best teams in the world, countries known for producing elite basketball talent. The competition was fierce, and every game felt like a war. But Reese and Clark rose to the occasion, feeding off each other's energy and elevating their teammates in ways no one thought possible. In the championship game, they delivered performances that left audiences speechless. Reese dominated the paint, scoring crucial points and locking down opposing players with her trademark intensity. Clark orchestrated the offense, hitting impossible shots and delivering pinpoint passes that left defenders scrambling. By the final buzzer, their team stood victorious, hoisting the trophy high above their heads. As fireworks exploded overhead and confetti rained down, Reese turned to Clark and extended her hand. For a moment, Clark hesitated, then grinned and pulled her into a hug instead. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Reese nodded, smiling despite herself. Yeah, we did. Looking back, neither of them could have predicted how far they'd come. What started as a reluctant partnership had transformed into something neither of them expected: respect, understanding, and maybe even friendship. They weren't just teammates anymore, they were allies, united by a shared goal and a newfound appreciation for each other. But this wasn't the end of their journey. If anything, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where they'd continue to push each other to greatness, both individually and collectively. Little did they know their bond would soon face its greatest test yet, because winning a global tournament was one thing. Facing challenges closer to home, that was another battle entirely. The rivalry between these two players had reached a fever pitch. Every game they played felt like a heavyweight bout, with both sides throwing everything they had at each other. The stakes kept getting higher, and the intensity never let up. But what no one saw coming was how their next encounter would push things to a breaking point, a moment that would change everything. It happened during the playoffs, when emotions were already running high. Both teams had fought tooth and nail to get there, and now they were facing off in a series that fans were calling the Battle of the Century. The first two games had been brutal, with neither side willing to give an inch. By the time Game 3 rolled around, tensions were through the roof. From the opening whistle, it was clear this wasn't going to be just another game. Reese came out swinging, literally. She set the tone early by blocking shots, grabbing rebounds, and dominating the paint like she owned the place. Her energy was relentless, almost intimidating. Every time her team scored, she turned to Clark and gave her that look, the one that said, "You're not beating me today." But Clark wasn't about to back down. If anything, she thrived under pressure. When Reese locked down the paint, Clark took over from the perimeter. She hit 3 after 3, silencing the crowd every time the ball swished through the net. Her teammates fed off her confidence, and soon her team started pulling ahead. The lead seesawed back and forth, neither side able to pull away. Then, late in the fourth quarter, things boiled over. With less than 5 minutes left on the clock, Clark drove hard into the lane, looking for a layup. Reese met her at the rim, rising up to block the shot. But instead of cleanly rejecting it, her elbow caught Clark in the face. Clark stumbled backward, clutching her cheek as the whistle blew. The arena erupted in noise, some booing, others cheering, as the referees huddled to discuss the call. When the dust settled, Reese was assessed a flagrant foul. Clark stayed on the ground for a moment, wincing in pain, before slowly getting up. As she walked to the free throw line, the cameras zoomed in on her face. There was anger in her eyes, but also something else: determination. She sank both free throws, tying the game once again. That's when things really got heated. On the next possession, Clark tried to drive past Reese, but Reese shoved her hard, sending her sprawling to the floor. This time, Clark didn't stay down quietly. She jumped up, pointing a finger inches from Reese's face, yelling something that couldn't be heard over the roar of the crowd. Reese stepped forward, her voice rising to match Clark's. Players from both teams rushed in to separate them, but the damage was done. The referees handed out technical fouls to both players, and after a few more heated exchanges, they were ejected from the game. As they walked off the court, the crowd was divided. Some cheered for Reese, others for Clark. But everyone agreed on one thing: this was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Social media lit up within minutes. Fans argued endlessly about who was at fault, dissecting every angle of the altercation. Reese took to her platform later that night, posting a fiery message. "She wants to talk trash? Fine, but don't come crying when you can't handle the truth. I'm still the best, and she knows it." Clark responded the next day, her tone calm but firm. "I respect tough competition, but there's a line. Tonight she crossed it, and trust me, I'm not backing down." For the rest of the series, their feud dominated headlines. Reporters camped outside arenas, desperate for quotes. Analysts debated endlessly about whether this rivalry had gone too far. Coaches pleaded for focus, reminding everyone that the goal was to win championships, not personal battles. But it was hard to ignore the tension simmering beneath the surface. Behind closed doors, the toll was becoming evident. Reese struggled to sleep at night, replaying the incident over and over in her mind. Was she too aggressive? Had she lost control? These questions haunted her. For years, she'd prided herself on being fearless, unshakable. But now, doubts crept in. What if people thought she was washed up? What if Clark really was better than her? Clark, meanwhile, wrestled with her own demons. Sure, she'd stood her ground, but the altercation weighed heavily on her. She hated confrontation. It wasn't in her nature. Yet here she was, smack dab in the middle of one of the most publicized rivalries in sports history. Friends told her she needed to take a step back to focus on her mental health. But how could she do that when the entire world seemed to be watching her every move? As the series dragged on, their clashes became less about basketball and more about pride. Every play felt personal, every glance loaded with meaning. They talked trash during timeouts, bumped shoulders under the basket, and exchanged icy stares whenever they crossed paths. It was exhausting, for them and for everyone watching. And yet, despite all the drama, something unexpected began to happen. People started noticing moments where the animosity softened, even if just for a second. After one particularly physical play, Reese extended a hand to help Clark up. Clark hesitated, then accepted it, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. In another game, after a spectacular move by Reese, Clark couldn't help but smile briefly before shaking her head and jogging back on defense. These small gestures went largely unnoticed by the media, but those paying close attention saw them for what they were: cracks in the armor. Beneath all the trash talk and tension, there was mutual respect brewing. They might have hated losing to each other, but deep down, they understood what the other brought to the table. Reese admired Clark's creativity and resilience. Clark respected Reese's toughness and determination. Neither would admit it publicly, but it was there. By the time the series ended, Clark's team emerged victorious, advancing to the next round. Reese watched from the sidelines, her expression unreadable. Some expected her to lash out afterward, to double down on her earlier comments. Instead, she surprised everyone by saying simply, "They earned it. We'll be back stronger next year." Clark, too, struck a conciliatory tone. During her post-game interview, she said, "Angel's a competitor, plain and simple. Playing against her pushes me to be better. That's what makes this rivalry special." For a while, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, they were starting to see each other in a new light. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Both women carried scars from their battles, both physical and emotional. And while their rivalry showed signs of softening, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. What neither of them realized at the time was that their journey was about to take a dramatic turn. An opportunity would arise that forced them to confront their differences, not as opponents but as teammates. Little did they know this twist of fate would redefine not only their relationship but also what it meant to truly be the best. The rivalry between these two players wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was personal. Every time they stepped onto the court, it felt like the world stopped to watch. The tension crackled in the air, and fans could sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. Their games weren't just contests. They were battles of wills, a clash of styles, and a test of who truly deserved to be called the best. Their second matchup came soon after the first, and everyone expected fireworks. Reese had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She wasn't going to let Clark outshine her again. Her coaches noticed a change in her during practice. She attacked drills with even more ferocity than usual. It was as if she had something to prove, not just to Clark, but to herself. This game wasn't just about winning, it was about respect. From the opening tip-off, Reese made her presence known. She dominated the paint, grabbing rebounds like they owed her money. Every time Clark tried to drive into the lane, Reese was there, blocking her path like an immovable wall. When Clark attempted a jump shot, Reese leaped up, swatting the ball away before it could even get close to the hoop. The crowd roared every time Reese flexed her muscles or yelled after making a big play. For the first half, it seemed like Reese was untouchable, but Clark didn't flinch. If anything, the harder Reese pushed, the calmer Clark became. She started picking apart Reese's defense with surgical precision. A quick crossover here, a no-look pass there. Clark was playing chess while everyone else was stuck in checkers. By halftime, despite Reese's dominance, Clark's team was still within striking distance. You could see it in her eyes. She wasn't done yet. The third quarter belonged to Clark. She began raining three-pointers from all over the court, each one more audacious than the last. Fans gasped when she pulled up from nearly 30 feet away and drained another shot, tying the game. The energy in the arena shifted. People leaned forward in their seats, whispering to each other. Was Clark about to steal the show again? Reese must have heard them because she clenched her fists and locked eyes with Clark during a timeout. It was clear she wasn't backing down. In the fourth quarter, things got ugly, or beautiful, depending on how you looked at it. Both players refused to give an inch. Reese threw her body around like a wrecking ball, muscling her way to the basket for tough layups. Clark countered with finesse, using clever footwork and lightning-fast reflexes to create space and score. The back and forth continued until the final minute, when the score was tied once again. With 10 seconds left on the clock, Clark found herself with the ball, guarded closely by Reese. Everyone in the arena held their breath. Would history repeat itself? Could Clark hit another miracle shot? Reese shadowed her every move, arms extended, daring her to take the shot. But instead of forcing it, Clark drove hard toward the basket, drawing Reese off balance. At the last second, she spun around and dished the ball to an open teammate under the hoop. Swish. The buzzer sounded, and Clark's team won by 2 points. Reese stood frozen for a moment, staring at the scoreboard. Then she turned and walked off the court without shaking hands. Her frustration was evident, and later, during post-game interviews, she didn't hold back. She didn't beat me, Reese said bluntly. Her teammate did. That's not skill, that's luck. Her tone was sharp, almost dismissive, but anyone watching could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. Clark, on the other hand, handled the victory with grace. During her own interview, she smiled and said, "Angel's a great player. She makes me better every time we face off. But tonight, my team got the job done." She didn't gloat or rub salt in the wound. Instead, she gave credit to her teammates and avoided taking direct shots at Reese. Still, her confidence was undeniable. She knew she'd won fair and square, and she wasn't afraid to let the world know it. As the season went on, their matchups became legendary. Each game added another chapter to their growing rivalry. One night, Reese would dominate, throwing down dunks and shutting down Clark's offense. The next, Clark would dazzle, hitting impossible shots and setting up her teammates for easy baskets. Neither player backed down, and neither showed any signs of slowing down. Fans ate it up. Social media blew up after every game, with people debating who was better. Some argued that Reese's physicality and defensive prowess made her the superior player. Others insisted that Clark's creativity and ability to adapt made her unstoppable. Highlights from their games racked up millions of views online, and commentators couldn't stop talking about them. They were polar opposites in so many ways, Reese's brute strength versus Clark's silky smoothness, but both were undeniably brilliant. Behind the scenes, though, the pressure was mounting. Reese felt like she had the weight of the world on her shoulders. Once considered the undisputed queen of the court, she now faced constant questions about whether she could keep up with the new generation of players. Critics pointed to her struggles against Clark as proof that her style of play was outdated. Reese knew she needed to evolve, but changing years of habits wasn't easy. Late at night, she'd lie awake wondering if she'd already peaked. Had she lost her edge? For Clark, the spotlight brought its own challenges. Being labeled the future of basketball came with expectations that were hard to live up to. Every missed shot, every turnover, felt like a personal failure. Off the court, she struggled to find balance. Friends told her she was becoming too serious, too focused on proving herself. Deep down, Clark wondered if she was losing sight of why she fell in love with basketball in the first place. Winning games was important, but was it worth sacrificing her happiness? Despite their differences, both women shared one thing in common: a relentless drive to be the best. They poured everything they had into their craft, leaving nothing on the table. And while their rivalry often felt like a war, it also pushed them to new heights. Reese worked harder than ever to improve her shooting range and agility. Clark spent hours studying film, learning how to counter Reese's aggressive defense. They were evolving, not just as players, but as competitors. By the end of the regular season, their clashes had become the stuff of legend. Fans packed arenas whenever their teams played, knowing they were witnessing history in the making. Analysts compared them to some of the greatest rivalries in sports history, but what no one realized was that their journey was far from over. Beneath the surface, cracks were forming, cracks that would eventually force both women to confront not just their opponent, but themselves. Little did they know, their rivalry would soon take a dramatic turn, one that would challenge everything. They thought they knew about competition, teamwork, and what it truly means to be the best. Basketball has always been more than just a game. For some, it's life itself, a way to dream big, push limits, and leave a mark on the world. And when two extraordinary players step onto the court with fire in their eyes, it becomes something magical. This is exactly what happened when Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark crossed paths. Angel Reese was already making waves long before this story began. Standing tall and fearless, she had earned her reputation as one of the toughest competitors in the game. Her dominance wasn't just about scoring points, it was about how she controlled every inch of the court. She could block shots that seemed impossible to stop, grab rebounds like they were hers by birthright, and shut down opponents with an intensity that left them questioning if they even belonged there. Reese didn't just play basketball, she owned it. Off the court, she carried herself with the same confidence. Whether it was interviews or social media posts, she never shied away from letting people know who she thought was the best. But then came Caitlin Clark. If Reese was all about power and grit, Clark brought something entirely different to the table. She was smooth, sharp, and unpredictable. Imagine watching someone hit three-pointers from distances that made you wonder if they even needed to be on the court. That was Clark. Her ability to read the game felt almost supernatural. One moment, she'd fake out defenders with a quick crossover. The next, she'd thread a no-look pass that would make your jaw drop. It wasn't just skill, it was art. Fans couldn't get enough of her. She wasn't just playing basketball, she was putting on a show. At first, their rivalry simmered quietly. They played for different teams in college, so their meetings were rare but memorable. Every time they faced off, it was like lightning striking twice. Reese tried to bully her way through Clark's defense, while Clark danced around Reese with moves that looked effortless yet deadly. Neither backed down. These games weren't just battles. They were spectacles. People started talking. Who was better? Was it Reese, whose sheer willpower intimidated everyone? Or was it Clark, whose creativity redefined what was possible? Then came the draft, the moment both women stepped into the professional league. Everyone knew this was going to change everything. Suddenly, they weren't just competing against random opponents anymore. Now, they were directly in each other's orbit. The anticipation was electric. Fans debated endlessly online. Would Reese crush Clark under her unstoppable force? Or would Clark's finesse prove too much for Reese to handle? Their first official matchup as pros only added fuel to the fire. From the opening tip-off, it was clear neither player planned to hold back. Reese dominated early, controlling the boards and slamming home dunks that echoed through the arena. But Clark refused to let her steal the spotlight. Slowly but surely, she chipped away at Reese's lead, sinking shot after shot with pinpoint accuracy. By halftime, the score was neck and neck, and the tension between them was palpable. The real drama unfolded in the final minutes of the game. With seconds ticking away and the score tied, Clark found herself guarded tightly by Reese. Most players would have panicked, but not her. Calmly dribbling beyond the arc, she sized up Reese, took one quick step back and launched a deep three-pointer. Swish. The buzzer sounded and the crowd erupted. Clark stood still for a moment, soaking it all in, while Reese stormed off the court, visibly frustrated. Afterward, during post-game interviews, things got even more heated. Reese dismissed Clark's game-winning shot as luck, saying it wouldn't matter in the bigger picture. "That doesn't win championships," she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. Clark, however, smiled confidently into the cameras, holding up the game ball like a trophy. "Luck?" she said, arching an eyebrow. "I think you mean greatness." And, just like that, the rivalry exploded. What started as friendly competition now turned into something deeper, more personal. Each game became a battleground where pride, talent, and determination collided. Their clashes weren't just about winning, they were about proving who truly deserved the title of the best player in the world. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning. As the season rolled on, their encounters grew more intense, their exchanges sharper and their performances more breathtaking. Reese doubled down on her physicality, determined to prove she was still the queen of the court. Meanwhile, Clark embraced the challenge, using the chaos to sharpen her skills and elevate her game. Fans couldn't get enough. Social media buzzed with memes, arguments, and highlights from their matchups. Some rooted for Reese, admiring her unapologetic aggression. Others cheered for Clark, captivated by her elegance and precision. Debates raged everywhere, from sports bars to classrooms to office water coolers. Even casual viewers found themselves sucked into the drama. It was impossible not to pick a side. Behind the scenes, though, cracks began to form. For Reese, the pressure mounted. Once untouchable, she now faced questions about whether she could keep up with the new generation of players. Could her old-school style survive in a league evolving faster than ever? For Clark, the weight of fame pressed heavily on her shoulders. Balancing expectations with authenticity was harder than she ever imagined. Both women were fighting battles. Few understood. Battles that went far beyond the court. As the season wore on, it became clear this wasn't just a rivalry between two athletes. It was a clash of philosophies, personalities, and dreams. Reese represented raw power, resilience, and tradition. Clark embodied innovation, grace, and adaptability. Together, they symbolized the heart of basketball itself, a sport constantly reinventing itself while honoring its roots. What no one realized at the time was how much this rivalry would shape them, not just as players, but as human beings. Little did they know, their journey was destined to take twists and turns none of them could have predicted. But for now, all eyes remained fixed on the court, waiting to see who would emerge victorious in the battle for supremacy.